When it comes to structuring your theme, you have a lot of freedom as to where you put the files in the theme directory. So let's go ahead and look at several examples of different themes and how they structure their files for inspiration on how we might want to structure our own. Let's go ahead and start with some of the core themes that come with Drupal. So what I'm going to do is expand the themes directory here. And let's start with the Stark theme. Now the reason why we want to start with Stark is because it's the simplest that a theme could possibly get. Okay. Now we have just 5 files it looks like here. We have layout.css, which contains some basic CSS for the layout, our logo file, the README file that includes information about this theme, our screenshot, and our .info. Now we could actually strip out the CSS, logo, README, and screenshot and just leave the info file, and that would allow us to enable our theme through the theme settings page. A couple of things to take note of here is that there's no templates that are being overridden. You don't see any .tpl, .php files, and there's no subfolders, so we don't have a subfolder for images or for CSS. Let's go ahead and take a look at a theme that does have subfolders. I'm going to go ahead and expand the Garland folder here, and let's take a look at this line by line. So we have a couple folders in this one, and then we also have some additional files. The folders here are color, and any theme with a color folder will typically be including files in that folder that line up with the color module that allows for a settings page to adjust the colors for the theme. So both Garland and Bartik will have this color folder. This also has an images folder that contains the image resources for this particular theme. Everything else, though, is in the base folder. We have comment.tpl.php, which is an override of the comment template. We have a couple of CSS files, and when you see the IE inside of the name of a CSS file, it typically has something to do with Internet Explorer. So this is Fix Internet Explorer Right to Left, RTL, and this is Fix Internet Explorer. So this is for right to left languages like Arabic, for example, and then this is for any other language. Garland.info is the .info file. We have our logo file. We have an override of the maintenance page template file, an override of the node and page template files. We have a print.css file. Now, you'll often see CSS files split up into several different resources instead of one giant CSS file. And a typical delineation is to put CSS that has to do with a print style in its own style sheet. That way it can be included separately when something is printed. And then we have style.css down here for every other type of page or display. We have our screenshot. We have style for right to left languages, our template.php file, and our theme settings.php file. Now, you may have noticed that there's a little bit of disjointedness as we worked through these files because we have some CSS files and some PHP files and some image files all kind of grouped together. And as we're going through, this is listed in alphabetical order. And so finding something specific might take a little bit of work. There's not a lot of files here, but if you imagine overriding a few more template files, adding a couple more CSS files, this can get pretty long. So let's take a look at Bartik, which separates out these specific resources into separate folders. I'm going to go ahead and minimize Garland and Stark, and then let's expand Bartik right here. Okay. Now you see we have several folders now, and the list of resources seems shorter. So we have color, again for the color module to add the ability to change colors for the theme. And then we have a CSS folder, an images folder, and a templates folder. So now as we add additional template overrides, we would add them to the template folder, or additional CSS files would go into the CSS folder. And then we have just the basic files inside of the root of the theme, our .info file, our logo and screenshot images, and our template.php file. Let's go ahead and expand the CSS folder and see how this is structured here. Now there's quite a few more files here than we saw in Garland. Something that Bartik does that Garland doesn't is separate out the styles that would normally be in style.css into separate files based on who might want to edit the styles. In particular, it takes the style.css and separates it out into layout.css and colors.css as well. Now all colors does is take the particular colors that are getting specified for various elements on the page and pulls out just the color definitions into this CSS file. So if somebody wants to modify just the colors, all they need to do is open up this, and there's less of a chance for them to mess up some other aspect of the CSS or be confused by the other CSS definitions that are around it. The layout.css file pulls out styles that are specific to the positioning of elements on the page. So for example, all of the column positioning definitions are in this file, as well as particular spacing between different elements. Pretty much everything else goes into style.css. One other advantage to splitting out style sheets based on their role is that when it comes to supporting right-to-left languages, you can further specify which particular groups of styles need to have special right-to-left definitions. So for example, there's a style right-to-left CSS and a layout right-to-left CSS, but there's not a colors right-to-left CSS. There's also a couple of specific CSS files in here, one for the maintenance page, because that will have different styling than the other pages, and then again the print.css, which is pulled in when a document is printed. Let's go ahead and take a look at the last core theme, 7, which is the administrative theme, and look at how this is structured. I'm just going to scroll down here. The 7 theme is structured somewhere between Garland and Bartik. Let's take a look at how. So for example, there's an images directory, but everything else is in the base directory, a little bit like Garland. But instead of having all of its styles in style.css, it separates it out into several different CSS files. Vertical tabs.css and jQuery UI theme.css. Now, instead of this being more directed at the end user, this is simply separating out a grouping of styles according to what it's supposed to accomplish. The jQuery UI theme.css file has CSS definitions that have to do with overriding the jQuery UI tools, whereas vertical tabs has to do with overriding the look of the vertical tabs tool in Drupal. Other than that, everything looks pretty familiar. We have some Internet Explorer fix style CSS files, our logo file, our maintenance page template file override, a page template file override. We have our screenshot, our 7.info file, our style and style right to left, our template file, and then the only other style sheet that looks a little unique here is the reset.css. And you'll see a convention like this used in a variety of themes. The goal of a reset file is to take all of the inconsistencies between browsers and attempt to create a common baseline across all browsers by resetting certain CSS properties.